Good morning. Welcome to BenBinFro Thought for the Day for Tuesday, the 16th of November. Today's reading is a well-known and, to my mind, rather scary passage from Matthew's Gospel. This is the passage which brings to a close the Sermon on the Mount. It is Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 to the end, and I shall read it in the NRSV version. Enter through the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the road is easy that leads to destruction, and there are many who take it. For the gate is narrow and the road is hard that leads to life, and there are few who find it. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorns, or figs from thistles? In the same way, every good tree bears good fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will know them by their fruits. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and cast out demons in your name, and do many deeds of power in your name? Then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Go away from me, you evildoers. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on rock. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall, because it had been founded on rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. Now, when Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority, and not as their scribes. Jan sometimes reminds us that these BenBinFro thoughts for the day are meant to be simply that, just informal thoughts which occur to us from reading a passage rather than finely wrought mini-sermons. But helpful, spontaneous thoughts on stuff like this are rather beyond my pay grade, to use an overworked modern idiom. It's troubling stuff, and I have to wrestle with it. Familiarity does not deaden the warnings. There are few who find the road that leads to life. Beware false prophets. I never knew you. Go away from me, you evildoers. The harsh thing about these verses for me is that those condemned seem to include many who may well think they are embracing Christianity, or at least practicing Christian virtues. So my immediate thoughts are to ask, where do I stand? How am I doing? I have always rather identified with the foolish man rather than the goody-goody wise man, but only up to a point. So I worry. I think I try to negotiate or plead with God, to ask him for a scorecard and then try to embellish it. And of course, it's all I. Therein lies the point, I suppose. And in articulating that point, I can do no better than to quote the most quotable of 20th century Christian thinkers. You will probably have read this at some stage. The terrible thing The almost impossible thing is to hand over your whole self, all your wishes and precautions, to Christ. But it is far easier than what we are all trying to do instead. For what we are trying to do is to remain what we call ourselves, to keep personal happiness as our great aim in life, and yet, at the same time, be good. We are all trying to let our mind and heart go their own way, centred on money or pleasure or ambition, and hoping, in spite of this, to behave honestly and chastely and humbly. And that is exactly what Christ warned us you could not do. That was, of course, C.S. Lewis, and today's reading in Matthew is, to me, precisely that warning. Over the years and centuries, many human codes of conduct have been devised, seemingly based, wittingly or otherwise, on the teachings of Christ on the Sermon on the Mount, while denying with great vehemence the existence of a Christian God. Think communism, liberal humanism, the woke movement. In the end, these belief systems seem to get dragged down by the weight of a central contradiction. How can you embrace universal moral values in a world in which you perceive there is no outside source of morality, when you try to remove Christ from the core of them? Such movements tend to end up as some form of unpleasant, pseudo-pious, sterile intolerance which undermines the good intentions which they initially espouse. The history of Christianity itself is by no means immune to that process. By their fruits you will know them. As a teacher rather charmingly put it, we are called to be fruit inspectors, not heresy hunters or thought police. The distinction is not always apparent, at least to me. Virtue signalling is another modern idiom, but an age-old practice. Some of us, I fear, indulge in it more frequently than we realize. Perhaps it has crept into today's thought for the day, and it is certainly not good fruit. Have a nice day, everyone.